Italy is experiencing one of the most violent weather events in recent years. In a matter of hours, the country went from enduring weeks of extreme heat to facing storms with hail, torrential rains, and wind gusts capable of wreaking havoc in several regions at once. What began as an isolated event in the north soon transformed into a chain of storms that simultaneously hit Lombardy, Piedmont, Emilia-Romagna, Upper Tuscany, and Marche. The fury of the weather left basements flooded, roads blocked, and parks closed as residents tried to protect their homes from the relentless water. In many cities, traffic ground to a standstill. Drivers trapped on avenues that had become veritable urban rivers had to wait for firefighters to arrive, while drains overflowed, unable to absorb the rain falling with unusual force. In the center of the country, the storms were no less destructive. In Lazio, thunder and lightning lit up the night, accompanied by hailstorms that covered the Oniene Valley in white. There, entire neighborhoods were underwater and roads became death traps for vehicles caught in the currents. Basilicata experienced scenes that looked like something out of a disaster movie. In a matter of minutes, the sky dumped what normally rains in a day, sweeping away cars, blocking drains, and leaving streets covered in ice. Residents improvised barricades with whatever they had on hand to stop the torrent that poured into garages and homes. But it was in the south and on the islands where the situation took on an even more dramatic character. Sicily, especially around Mount Etna, witnessed flash floods that transformed stairways into waterfalls and avenues into overflowing riverbeds. Firefighters received dozens of calls for help, rescuing people trapped in vehicles and pumping water from flooded homes. In Catania, images of cars floating and residents taking shelter on the upper floors of their homes spread across the country. Fear gripped the population, aware that another storm could trigger another emergency at any moment. Sardinia was also not spared the impact. In the southern province, towns such as Samatzai, Pimentel, and Senorbì experienced 15 minutes of sheer terror. A hailstorm with ice stones up to 6 centimeters in diameter shattered the windows of parked cars, damaged crops, and turned streets into slippery slopes. Residents described the scene as apocalyptic. The skies suddenly turned black. The wind battered homes and fields, and the deafening sound of hail on roofs and vehicles seemed to herald the end of the calm. Roads were transformed into makeshift channels. Fields were covered in water, and even the most durable vehicles were damaged by the intensity of the storm. No one can recall seeing anything like this in such a short period of time. Pimentel was one of the hardest hit areas. State Highway 128 was completely flooded near the turnoff to Samatzai, forcing traffic to be closed. Local authorities warned that the storm was part of a larger system, divided into 3 fronts that continued to affect the center, the interior, and the southwest coast of the island. Elsewhere in Sardinia, heavy rains reached the mountains of Nuoro and the surrounding area of Samatzai in Ogliastra. There, lightning struck frequently while gusts of wind tore branches and roofs. Tensions mounted when a huge pine tree fell onto Provincial Highway 5 near Senorbì. Two cars traveling at the time were unable to avoid the collision. The result was one person injured and a major scare for those who witnessed the accident. Colliery firefighters arrived immediately, secured the area, and worked for hours cutting down and removing the tree to clear the road. The operation became a symbol of the magnitude of the storm and the efforts of the emergency services. Meanwhile, farmers in Sardinia reported incalculable damage to orchards, vineyards, and crops. Agricultural associations asked the government for urgent aid to recover what the storm had destroyed in minutes after months of hard work. The National Civil Protection Agency, which had already been monitoring the phenomenon, maintained almost continuous alerts throughout the country. The risk level went from yellow to orange in a matter of hours, reflecting the severity of the episodes that were repeated in different regions. The warnings were clear: avoid underpasses, avoid driving on flooded roads, secure all objects on balconies and terraces, and prepare for sudden drops in temperature and visibility. However, many residents were surprised by the speed with which the storm struck. Images captured in different regions showed a common pattern. Streets transformed into torrents, cars swept away like toys, flooded businesses, and neighbors working side by side to place sandbags and build makeshift walls to prevent runoff. In Basilicata, entire families used buckets and shovels to remove the ice accumulated in front of their homes, while others tried to rescue belongings from the water that continued to rush in unchecked. In Sicily, tourists were trapped in hotels and restaurants, while locals tried to remain calm amid the roar of the water. The summer season, which should have been marked by sunshine and tranquility, was marred by nature's fury. The harsh weather also had an impact on mobility. Trains stopped, flights delayed, and roads closed in several regions increased the feeling of isolation for many communities that, suddenly, were cut off from the rest of the country. Local authorities insisted that these types of phenomena, increasingly frequent and intense, are a reminder of the impact of climate change on the Mediterranean. What was once considered exceptional now seems to be becoming a recurring threat. Experts pointed out that the combination of extreme heat waves and violent storms creates ideal conditions for dangerous episodes. The overheated atmosphere accumulates moisture, which is then released with devastating force. Neighbors interviewed all described the same feeling: fear and helplessness. In a matter of minutes, everything changed. The sky closed in, hail began to fall like stones, and we could only pray that the roof would hold, said a resident of Pimentel. Although it is still early to calculate the economic impact of these phenomena, there is already talk of losses in the millions, both in infrastructure and agriculture. What's worse is that the alerts remain active, which means that the rains and hailstorms could recur. Italy, which recently suffered the ravages of scorching heat, now faces the violence of storms that do not distinguish between north, center, or south. From the Alps to the islands, the vulnerability of the territory has been exposed. The entire country remains on edge, its eyes fixed on the skies, which, at any moment, could unleash the fury of nature once again.